only to find out literally the guy had no idea how to play keyboards.
That we ran into some artists that really didn't care anything about the Christian music scene. I saw some people fooling around here and there every once in a while, but they are always going to end up coming first to a certain degree.
Didn't drink much until I went on the road with Christian bands. They're going to destroy you. They're going to act like, well, they're your friends to your face. It's really about money, but it says and it's couched about faith.
So in my last video on Christian contemporary music, I introduced you to my 4 friends who were professionals in the CCM industry with over 30 years of combined experience. We took a look at some of the problems in the Christian music industry using the 7 deadly sins. We uncovered some serious problems that are happening in Christian media, and we explained why we find CCM music to be annoying and mundane. If you haven't watched the video yet, you need to click the card up here and check that out. There are a lot of eye-opening experiences and perspectives in that video that you would have never considered, and it will better inform your watch of this video. I was shocked when I conducted these interviews, and I know it'll keep you on the edge of your seat. When we finished going through the 7 deadly sins, I told you that was just the beginning. There's a much bigger picture here that involves the culture of manipulation and the culture of silence. Let's start digging deeper into that by talking to our friend Jack, who is the stage manager. Again, Jack and Bob were pseudonyms given to my friends who wished to remain anonymous, and they were re-recorded by voice actors. Jack's first gig stage managing was actually with a pretty big CCM artist. Funny enough, that CCM artist didn't want to go on tour with a stage manager at all, and originally was not going to hire Jack. It was actually their production manager who insisted that a stage manager was necessary for a tour this size. From a pro touring perspective, that's an incredible oversight on behalf of the artist team. Let's hear Jack tell you in his own words.
They were going to go out and not have a stage manager at all. And the production manager said, absolutely not. We can't pull this off without a stage manager. They were going to say, oh, well, we'll just have our crew chiefs knock everything out. And the production manager was like, y'all are insane. He actually ended up paying me out of his pocket. The tour didn't pay me. The production manager did.
That's pretty crazy if you ask me. If your production manager is that adamant that you need this member of staff on your tour, that he's willing to pay them out of his own pocket to hire them, that's a massive red flag that you should find the money to hire this guy. It's ignorant at best, but these CCM tours are known for penny pinching to the point of insanity. And they're also known for asking their crew to do far more than they were hired on for. The difference between what Jack was told were his responsibilities on tour and what he actually wound up doing is pretty insane.
For a tour of that size, that role should have been manageable for me. So I knew going in there was going to be some light backlining, which is getting the music gear set up, and stage managing. As I got there, different people would ask me to do more and more stuff, and I ended up doing all the backline. Then I found out I had to do set carping as well. For those who don't know what that is, I wound up having to build the entire stage each day. Now, that doesn't mean the theater floor, but all the risers and such. I was in charge of getting those down, and then I got all the backlines set up. I had to do all of that while trying to be a stage manager.
The CCM world is known for underpaying its crew almost criminally. But then being expected to break your backs, performing responsibilities that you were told weren't your responsibility, adds injury to insult. The trend in CCM seems to be paying as little money as possible, even if that means putting people's health at risk. Jack continued.
A lot of times these were in churches and the workers were volunteers with no experience. They were constantly injuring themselves, thinking like, oh, I can do more. And I would try to tell them, look, we have this many people here. We're going to do this as safely as possible. We had these base plates on the bottom of these towers that were easily hundreds of pounds because they had to hold up these steel towers. This one lady was the only person holding on one of those plates, and one of our guys was telling her, you need to get more people on this. And she goes, no, I got it. He goes, you need to get more people. And she goes, just do it. And he goes, okay. He hit the pin and it fell directly on her foot. Crushed it. We had injuries left and right. which, as I've learned more about being a stage manager, I realized I should have been more in that area telling them to stop. But because I had to take care of all these other things, I could only do like 40% of each job at the max. Could I do it better now? Yes. But could they afford me? Absolutely fucking not.
Jack left that CCM artist after that tour. As bad as the pay and work conditions were, surprisingly, that wasn't actually the worst part of it. Shortly after, he picked up a gig working for a larger mainstream artist as a tour manager.
Now switch that and look at the boss I have now. They told me, you're not going to be just stage managing. You're going to do half the back line and you're going to work with the kabuki, or the big curtain that drops down. They told me that beforehand, and I've never had to do more or less. They were very clear about what exactly I'd be doing. It's kind of a running theme that if someone comes from the CCM world, they're going to be great because they've had to do work, pull off the most with the absolute least. A lot of times that's almost like a gold star recommendation. Like, oh, you can survive that? Come here, let's actually get you paid and get you some proper hands and see what you can actually do.
So how does CCM tours get away with paying so little but expecting so much? Better question is, where do they keep finding people to hire for that type of job?
I think for some tours, it's a way to get younger people and newer people in the industry on. Almost like an internship where they know they can dog this person a little bit harder. Then guilt them by saying, it's for the Lord, so don't complain. It felt really gross to me as a person who does believe.
Jack shares an example of people literally asking the impossible of him.
We paid for a certain amount of staging, and for some of the churches we were in, we just couldn't fit it all on there. I remember there were multiple times where they'd say, is there any way we can get that to fit? I was like, absolutely not. If you want this show to run on time, we have to have space for the openers. Already the floor tom was touching the corner of the stage. Like, this is not gonna work well. And they go, we prayed about it, and we really feel like the Lord just wants us to put this whole stage out. If they actually believe that, then I feel sorry for them. I can't grow space out of a stage.
At very least, that's incredibly annoying, but you can't say anything about it, or your job's on the line. And it makes it all that much harder when your boss walks around saying things that you know are wrong.
I heard the artists say some of the most wild shit. Some of the most toxic stuff. This artist is pretty public with their struggles with mental health, so they'd go on stage and talk about their struggles with mental health and how much God helped them through it. Off stage, they'd say, therapy is learning how to live without God. Basically, any form of treatment other than praying to God and you're doing something wrong. Then they would constantly make racial remarks. In his band, there was one white guy and the rest were of different ethnicities. They would try to tell the artist, hey man, you can't say that. That's not cool.
This all peaked for Jack one day when the artist asked to see a picture of Jack's wife. Jack's wife is black, and the artist didn't know that at the time. When Jack showed him the picture, the artist asked Jack if he had jungle fever, which is a pretty fucking racist statement. He said this in front of Jack and in front of all of his bandmates, many of whom were also black.
Holy shit, we can't believe they just said that. I ended up leaving the tour. They would just say shit like this all the time. They would intentionally put this divide between them and their band. But then they'd go on stage and say, hey, look at us, we're such a diverse group, we're all for the Lord. Then they'd turn around and intentionally make them feel like an other off stage. Like, do you not see your cognitive dissonance here? A number of their black band members wound up leaving shortly after that tour. They've all taken cuts to money just to get away from the artists. They can't deal with the work environment.
I asked Jack if he thought the artist was a hard bigot. Jack replied no, he doesn't think he's a bigot to the level of like a KKK or a neo-Nazi, but he did indicate that he thought this could be a trend in the industry. This is what Jack had to say in relation to the artist.
I think they believe there's a superiority difference between white people and other races. I think they intentionally hire people who aren't white to tell themselves they aren't racist. I'd love to say who the artist is, but there'd be a lot of people who'd be out of work. Like, it's not just the artists who'd be affected by this. Especially right now with how rare music gigs are, I don't want to shoot my boys in the foot and cost them their current incomes.
Look, I will not begrudge any group of friends having any sense of humor they want to have and they find works for them, regardless of how sick and twisted it is. I mean, as long as they're not hurting anyone, it's fine. But Jack and several of the other bandmates and crew told this artist to stop several times. At what point are you just being an asshole or even legitimately racist? Hearing Jack's stories blew me away. I mean, the bigotry is bad enough and it was awful, but I think that's more relegated to a minority of the industry. Jack even indicated he didn't think that that was representative of everyone in CCM. But the blatant manipulation seems to be an astounding trend. Whether it's people asking the impossible to be done for their benefit and calling it God's will, the artists asking for money from their audience in order to help, quote, spread the word of God, or even just how manipulative the music itself is, it all seems to boil down to how can I manipulate someone to do something that I want done and call it the will of God.
And I thought, wow, 15 minutes with a guy who knows more than me, and I'm more productive just like that. But yet, we're going to put it on our pastors to teach us how God's going to do this. We're going to try to get on some conference to make sure we know who God is for us. I came to tell somebody right now, you have as much access to the peace of God as anybody else does, but it's going to take your work. It's going to take your passion to say, I don't want to look back on my life and find out that I had peace that I didn't use, confidence that I didn't use. All I had to do was go to the Maker and say, Lord, teach me your way. Come on, somebody, I got peace in my pocket, and I don't want to leave it. Oh.
I can tell you from my own experiences growing up Catholic, yeah, I mean, there were times when my family would pray to God asking for guidance on things. I am absolutely positive my parents made decisions for my life based upon how they felt God was guiding them through prayer. But they never pulled one of these, oh, you have to do this because God told us you have to do this. It was always viewed as God indicating what decision they should make. There was never a guaranteed outcome from this decision, and they never assumed that by getting inspiration from God gave them license to be authoritarians. If I ever had a big decision to make, they never said, oh, we prayed and God said you should do this. They told me to pray for guidance about it. And they said as long as I remain open, God will answer me. A lot of times, that answer's no. I'm not very familiar with the evangelical world, which is where a lot of this CCM culture is rooted. To me, this entire thing of like, oh, well, we prayed about it and God said you have to do this, seems like a blatant manipulation tactic to me. But in the spirit of honest questioning, I had to ask myself, is it possible that these people actually believe that when they say that? I asked Jack.
I'm not sure if they really buy when they say, I've been praying and this is what God has been saying. I don't think they buy that. But I do think there's some ignorance in how things are shaking down since they're not here on the stage.
It's a misinterpretation. If you have the faith the size of a mustard seed, which is very small, the size of a grain of sand, a little bit bigger, you can move mountains. And so therefore, you're expected to be able to pull a miracle out of your butt anytime anybody says, hey, I prayed about it.
Seems like a lot of other people aren't buying this either. What a surprise. I explained Jack's situation to Clayton and also the entire situation of artists asking their audience for money in exchange for, quote, spreading the word of God. Here's what Clayton had to say about that.
The truth of the matter is, I mean, again, there's a lot of really good people who just are struggling with money versus faith. But a lot of people are using their position to make a lot of money. But the trick of what your buddy is saying is they call it ministry when it's in order to get people to do something for next to nothing. And they feel this pat on their back that they can do it.
They try to make it a moral effort, like, we're all doing this to spread the word of the Lord.
At the end of the day, it's a business.
Clayton said it's a business, which is a profit-driven entity. They call it ministry, which is not a profit-driven entity. That's dishonest.
Those of us who come right out of school and their first job, you're having to do everything from getting the coffee to running around to get everything. And at least in the non-Christian world, it's acknowledged that you're doing your time. But in the world, the Christian media world, it's very easy to call that ministry, that you're doing it for Jesus, when no, you're just a gopher.
I was at a place where I couldn't really talk back because I really needed the job. I needed the money. I couldn't say exactly what I wanted to. I actually prefer how the country world is ran. At least there, everyone knows we're all here to do our job well, but we're here for a paycheck. Whereas in the Christian world, it was, you're doing this for the Lord so you can accept more shit from the higher ups. You can accept more bad work conditions because we have no money and we're trying to do this for the Lord, as they drive off in brand new Lexuses and shit.
Now, this is not how all CCM artists run their businesses. This is definitely a very serious and common problem in that world, but there are some of them who run their businesses quite fairly and don't ask too much of their crew, a lot like Jack's current secular employer.
There's some absolute great people who are doing that, but it's very quickly overshadowed by the hypocrisies of so many others.
And the manipulation doesn't just come from the artists in the CCM world. Sometimes they are the victims of manipulation themselves.
You'll maybe have a promoter, which happened a lot, where the bands are expected to take some type of a cut or whatever, some type of percentage, and it was way below. Like you said, there were a lot of times that Christian artists, for the sake of ministry, were expected to sacrifice making a living because that was your job. That's what Christ would have done. You know, the whole what would Jesus do kind of a thing. Would he fight for what he had coming to him, or would he just nail himself to a cross and take one for the rest of us? And it's no wonder sometimes I think some Christian artists come off with such an attitude because for the sake of God, they're giving up a lot of different things, maybe well-meaning and everything like that, but they're getting taken advantage of. I think that happens probably more frequently than I am even aware. I have had that happen to me before where it's like, well, all we have is this. Can you make do with this? Well, we'll take a love offering. We won't charge for tickets. The love offering from a bunch of teenagers who don't have any money. Okay, that's cool. How am I supposed to get to my next venue 3 cities away?
To me, the most disgusting form of manipulation comes from the music itself, the way it's written, what it's saying, or really what it's not saying. The artists know exactly what they're doing and what effect this is going to have on their audience, and they dress it up as this spiritual experience that they should be paid for. If you're looking for a paid spiritual experience, it's cheaper to go to your homie who works at the Denny's kitchen and pick up a tab of LSD, my man.
Coldplay, the lead singer, Chris Martin, was a worship leader before. So his dad, I'm not sure if his dad or his family was big over in England in the charismatic evangelical world. So Chris, when you start off in that world, again, the worship world, it's about the lifts, and it's about kind of that manipulation, that emotional take, that emotional drive, and then the payoff. It's that payoff moment where everybody just goes, ah. And that's, if you listen to Coldplay's music, it's and much like U2's, there's that moment of that release moment, and that really was taught from starting off in worship music. It's about the melody lines and the simple melody, and is it uplifting? But at the heart of it, Mike, it's manipulation. It's emotional and spiritual manipulation. The lifts, how things go, how you time it for the light suddenly hitting. But all the lifts are really meant to emotionally manipulate you to you thinking that you have this big spiritual moment. It's so easy to call something God when it's just really good song crafters who know how to get the desired effect.
They kind of use that as an entrapment. It's a very subtle entrapment. I think that people can experience rapture, like that emotional rapture, in these worship settings just because the music is moving them. The music is designed to hit you at an emotional place. And I think a lot of people confuse that with experiencing God. A lot of people confuse powerful emotions with experiencing God.
I think at the end of the day, it's showbiz. It's showbiz 101. Whether or not you're a rock,
the big successful guys.
But like even when you're starting out, you see what works. And so I think in the Christian world, you see, okay, we got to throw everybody's hands up in the air and like have this big, powerful moment, emotional moment.
It'd be like the same way as planning like
this is the moment where everyone's going to mosh, or this is the moment where everyone's going to clap.
Same thing. So it's showbiz. So you see what works, and you construct your show and you construct your music upon where you want to take it. Really, you want to, and I argue that it's manipulating your audience rather than letting them have an understanding of where they want to go.
What's annoying about CCM is this misguided spirituality and its mistaken association with experiencing something supernatural, then centralizing that within one theology. It seems like a lot of people write these songs to feed into this cycle of what I call entrapment.
So in that sense, so is your typical rock show or pop show. That's also manipulating your audience.
Absolutely.
What makes the Christian one different?
Because you're using God on it. And I think that's, they're calling it a movement of the Spirit. There's all of these catchphrases. There's all of these phrases in the Christian world that the Spirit is moving. Well, I think it's just showbiz.
And I know there are a lot of people in the industry who feel this way, who are Christians.
CCM artists are selling their audience a version of faith that doesn't exist, keeping their audience content and comfortable by selling them what's perceived to be a spiritual experience like a drug. Then they ask said audience for money so that they can continue to do the same thing to other people. In many ways, it's very much the same in the pop world, but they pretend to worship at different altars. And just like in the pop world, you are not allowed to challenge your audience or ask your audience to challenge themselves, because that destroys the illusion of comfort that you've created.
You're not able to talk about the struggle. You're not able to talk about, your doubts.
You just sit around a campfire and sing, and everything is going to be happy and fantastic. Like, that's just not an accurate representation of what faith looks like for me.
C.S. Lewis, one of my favorite, it's like part of his entire decisions of faith were based upon doubt and disbelief, and that proved belief. But it's really, there's nothing about disbelief or questions that are celebrated in it. So there's all of the disbelief, questions, but that just is, you're not able to discuss it. You're only able to really mention these things because, again, it's about shepherding others rather than having an honest conversation about faith.
It's just clearly very safely written music written for a specific demographic.
CCM and overall Christian music, it's not about art. It's really meant to be a safe alternative to something else that, has challenges of the world with it. But CCM has been labeled as that safe moment, and it makes people feel, parents and pastors feel good about letting their people listen to something if it says Jesus instead of anything else out there.
I remember specifically a conversation with my dad, who is very religiously active. He goes, "Yeah, man, I can't even listen to most Christian music because they don't actually talk about what's going on. They don't talk about the struggles of life. They don't talk about how you fall in love with somebody. They just keep it 100% Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. I mean, Jesus is the most important thing, but he put us on this earth. We still have heartbreak. We still have trials and tribulations that are completely disconnected from your faith."
Steve offers his own poignant perspective here.
Some of the great hymn writers of the past. Well, one of my favorites, Horatio Spafford. "It is well with my soul." If we see the telegraph, the family ship had wrecked and all 4 of his daughters perished. And the guy wrote that hymn out of pain. In spite of the fact that I just lost my entire family, I'm going to sit here and just praise your name because if without you, I would fail. I'm sorry, but people don't necessarily write from that spot anymore. They write to meet a quota. Or they write lazily and just have repetitive word, praise his name, he is great, he is great, he is great. And then, verses 1 through 4 are all the same, and the chorus is monotonously repeated 100 times over. A 3-second song ends up lasting 10 minutes. From our perspective, and from the Become the Night perspective, it's lazy songwriting, obviously, but it's also lazy execution too, as far as the element of the faith that you're supposed to be singing about. Your Christian crowd isn't going to know any better. They're all they're going to want is something that they can sing along with. and it needs to be repeatable after the first verse. You just grab a hold of the lowest common denominator, and that's where I think a majority of Christian artists write from, instead of a really intense place of originality.
As hard as I have been on CCM artists throughout this series, it's not as simple as black and white, and it never will be. There are a lot of artists who are trying to do the right thing, or artists who think they are doing the right thing. These artists aren't just faithless people out there peddling what they know to be snake oil. There are a lot of struggles that CCM artists face that they can't talk about.
At the heart of it, there's a lot of really good people. I mean, people are people no matter what. I think there's a natural struggle, especially if you're associated with something that is so faith-focused rather than art-focused. And so there's the natural tendency of humans to, we got into it for the right reasons, to try to create music and art, and somehow along the way, and you realize, as I said, you're in an arena playing what should be this fun moment, and you realize that it's not about your art at all, and there's a real depression that really can turn. Most people are really, really good people who are struggling with challenges of life, but they're kind of idolized for being this massive person of faith when they're just as normal and struggle as everybody else does. How are you gonna have an honest conversation with a fan that thinks that you're a theologian? An artist having that visceral connection with a fan means like that there has to be an equal level of honesty, right? You know, you have to be honest, but you have to be like, there has to be a two-way conversation, but there really isn't overall in CCM, there's not a two-way conversation. It's a one-way conversation, as from an elevated, pulpit where you can't have a real relationship with your audience. And it just creates that real tension of perfection that, humans are not perfect people. The moment that you put somebody up on a pedestal that they're this grand, there's already a struggle with music and art that fame already has the challenge with. But when the moment that you put a level of like being this elevated spiritual being on top of that, is when it really messes with your head. And that's it. It really got to my head, and it got to most of the people that I was on the road with.
So you're hyper aware of the hypocrisy.
It's significant. I mean, but every human is we're all hypocrites, but can we admit it? I think that's the challenge. But when you're in the public eye like that, you can't really be a hypocrite. And in that world, the minute that you show that you're a human, or there's something that's messy, you're kind of cast out of it so quickly or forgotten.
I think that there's an added layer of hypocrisy there with these artists when they're just dicks. There's other Christian artists I've had the privilege to work with that are fantastic people. They have no bad intentions and really just want to spread community and love and good music. I have no problem with that. But there's these other artists who act like dicks, and I'm like, wait a minute, aren't you supposed to be spreading kindness and love and community through your music? Isn't that kind of implied in the Christian world? And not only are they not abiding by that, but they're acting holier than thou with a public-facing persona, trying to maintain this godly attitude, but you're just a dick. I think that when you compound those two things, that is especially disgusting.
It expects a level of perfection that, I think I said earlier, it's about, we're all hypocritical people. Can we acknowledge our own challenges and struggles? But that world really has a difficult time doing. Ultimately, people are hiding all of their dirty laundry because that's their livelihood, and they make a good livelihood at it.
Picture this, you're making a livelihood doing what you believe to be the work of God. You're well-liked, and you feel like you're changing people's lives for the better. But what if you do something wrong? Or even worse, what if you think something that doesn't fit in to your culture's groupthink? Are you willing to be disliked and lose your income in order to speak the truth?
There's really good people who are struggling with the inner conflict of both, but they're still protecting their bank account. They're protecting their own business. The fact that they make $250,000 a year, but they are good people, but you're protecting your income, at the same time. So that's just the challenge of it, so you don't get as much honesty in it.
Obviously, this leads to massaging or just all-out silencing the truth. And having to keep all that to yourself while being such a public and loved figure can be extremely damaging to a person. People love you for who you present to them, but there's no possible way they can love you for who you actually are if you can never share that. They wind up loving a facade. They love a mannequin.
It can be so empty to be so close to what you want, like to what you've always kind of wanted in your mind of achieving a level of moment, but it's so empty. It's not a, I understand why people really kind of got screwed up in the middle of it, because you're so close yet so far away. I had my wild years and dumb things, but ultimately, like when you're in the middle of it, you don't have that ability to be that mess, you know? And so you have to keep hiding it and sanitizing it along the way. In the midst of all of this, it's like the idealism that you get into it, and suddenly you start making a lot of money. But then how do you go to bed at night? And I struggled with a lot of drinking and a lot of other extra issues myself, that like I was the chief hypocrite of everything. So anything that I say is labeled, is the mirror is directly upon me first. And that's why I had to get out of it. It's like I have no interest in doing anything in the faith world. I care deeply about it, but it's just too rife with the pluralisms and the duality. That's just not worth having that as part of your everyday conversations. It's just not worth it. So there's some stories that are really fun, that are really funny, and I can share, but there's some that I won't share because they're friends and they're just as messed up as me or anybody else. It's a weird world when you're thrust in a spotlight about your faith rather than about how good your songs are at the end of the day.
Look, it's one thing to be a conflicted human being. We all are to one degree or another. I mean, it's the nature of our existence. But not being able to share that conflict with anyone, having to keep that to yourself, not being able to tell your bandmates about it, not your friends, not your family, not your fans, it's torture. And that's going to destroy somebody.
When you say hiding their dirty laundry, you mean from the public eye, not necessarily from each other.
A bit of both, but I mean, there's some quite famous Christian artists who struggle with homosexuality, and I'm not going to name anything, but it's something whereas they can't talk about that, even really with a few people, or because it gets out and suddenly they're completely their career's done. And you can't do anything with it. I mean, heck, in the day, if you got divorced, you were castigated.
They're not even Catholic.
I know, right?
They're jumped on and brutalized by the church. Instead of being, hey, look, let me help you out with where you're struggling, all of a sudden they're kicked out, all responsibilities taken from them. Some of them, even their record contract was yanked because they messed up and they slept with somebody or something like that. It's like you're held to a higher standard than anybody else. That's part of the ball game. I mean, it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll, isn't it? If a Christian, though, gets involved in any of those things other than the rock and roll bit, wow, goodbye career. And so a lot of times it's easier to jump ship and spread a positive message without mentioning necessarily God or Jesus or anything like that. You're still helping people, but you're not setting yourself up for the criticism. And that's just as much of an indictment, I think, sometimes of judgmental people in the church as it is of the CCM industry in and of itself.
These guys are held to this higher standard because they're Christian artists. I guess the devil's advocate, no pun intended, is, shouldn't they be? Because shouldn't they be expected to live the faith that they profess in their music and in their daily lives?
That's an excellent question. And frankly, I would say that is a logical follow question. The only problem is it really kind of misses the point of the gospel that is supposed to be sung about or preached about from a Christian band. People expect Christians to be perfect, but that's not true. And we attempt to do better and better by relying on Him in order to become the person that we are created to be and be fulfilled and live an abundant life. I mean, that's what the hope of the Christian faith is supposed to be all about. But because of misrepresentation by, unfortunately, the church itself, it has come to mean something completely different. The piousness, the holier-than-thou attitudes, those are all things that have crept in because people are idiots. We should be the ones saying, yes, I screwed up, and I've been forgiven. This is great. This is the good news. This is the gospel that we're supposed to be singing about as a Christian artist.
There's not just hypocrisy from an individual artist perspective. There's hypocrisy throughout this entire CCM culture. It's a culture that teaches love and forgiveness, but will react absolutely ruthlessly if one of their artists steps out of line. It makes it a lot easier to stay quiet about your feelings or your failings and being able to own up to them and asking for forgiveness. Here's what happened to one of Steve's friends who was a big CCM artist when he admitted by his own volition that he cheated on his wife while on tour.
Judgment from Christians, from the church. Some of the message boards blew up. It was such a disappointment. I looked up to you. How could you? His record contract was dropped. All of his records were pulled off the Christian shelves in all the bookstores. Basically, because he screwed up and admitted it and owned up to it, his entire living was wrecked.
So we're drawing a direct parallel to modern cancel culture right now.
Bingo! Yeah, you're absolutely right. We started that a long time ago.
There's no path given to redemption. They burn the effigy, they destroy the life, and there's no realm socially for forgiveness, whether that be today's standards or even in the CCM world. Does that sound accurate?
That is better than I could have said it, frankly. I mean, that's excellent, yes. And that's the thing that the Christians should be the most proficient at, is the whole forgiveness and redemption and restoration, because that's exactly what God does for us, and that's the example that Christ set. And if the church and CCM industry isn't going to do it, then what are we doing?
So why is the Christian community so ferocious with their artists, needing them to be absolutely perfect, no blemishes to speak of?
Your external behavior is what most people see. And so frequently, if some external behavior goes against that, some Christians will just jump all over that and say, you're not being a good example. We can't have you out in front. You're going to have to sit back until you fix this. And so frequently, that's maybe what should happen. Where it's like, okay, hold on. Let's just get this fixed a little bit. Granted, your reputation might be a little bit dinged, but you know what? It's a great opportunity to say, you know what? I screwed up, and here's how God restored me. But that's not necessarily what happens. Frequently, there's so much ill will, so much anger, so much of the 7 deadly sins, like we talked about earlier, that gets tangled up in correcting somebody's behavior, that there's so much damage done in the aftermath that everybody's turned off, and somebody walks away from the faith, and a lot of people don't want anything to do with Christianity because of the judgmentalism that comes along with it.
Steve then described another aspect of being a CCM artist I would have never even anticipated, and this really helped close the loop on this entire thing.
Some of those standards are basically when the Bible talks about church leadership and those qualified to lead. It's considered a leadership position to preach the gospel by a lot of fundamentalist type of Christians.
You're looping in Christian artists in that.
Yes, exactly. Because the Christian artist, the Christian performer is considered to be in a position of leadership in the church where they are a preacher or a teacher of the gospel, but through music. There's a certain sets of standards that certain people have to live up to or are supposed to live up to in order to be qualified, quote unquote, to hold that position. And so when you are no longer qualified, you are not just removed from that position, frequently you are ostracized. There are guidelines for how to handle church discipline as well from Scripture. And so frequently those are taken to almost extreme measures when dealing with a Christian artist or singer or performer that has fallen from that place of being above reproach.
The concept of being excommunicated is just not good for either party, I think. That leaves a bad taste in someone's mouth. Then they associate all of Christianity with their experience.
This is what is called gatekeeping. Something or someone that doesn't fit a certain standard is no longer a part of the group. The gatekeeping effect, I think, is the fulcrum on which all of this garbage that we've talked about throughout this entire series hinges upon. Intimidation into silence, lest you be stripped of your title, your income, and your community.
There's a gatekeeper effect in any level of music or art, but it's elevated even more so in the Christian world because it's like, okay,
It's on the premise of existential morality.
Absolutely.
When the stakes of your behavior are everlasting life versus everlasting damnation, yeah, that's going to encourage people to be a lot harsher about things. So yeah, we know the entire CCM community acts as gatekeepers, but there are actually hierarchies in this gatekeeper system. The fans gatekeep the artist, the labels gatekeep the artist, but there is one very important gatekeeper that I would have never considered that really shocked me. Who are the ultimate gatekeepers in CCM?
Ultimately, it's the pastors and the youth pastors. Well, they're the ones who are telling people to buy this because it's safe. And the safety is the whole thing, safety versus something else.
So in that sense, the artists are appealing to the puritanical nature of the pastors.
Yes. The label heads, the radio, everything that's set up just like the mainstream, they're there to make sure that you don't upset the people who are going to buy your records or go to your gigs, because they're
kind of like the first line of defense.
Yes.
It is a well-oiled machine that is designed to do several things. Sometimes more benevolent things, sometimes malevolent. And it's hard to tell sometimes.
I understand there's a tension as a religious leader between trying to include as many people as you can in your religion, but also maintaining the integrity and precepts that religion is founded upon. But as we'll see, that motivation quickly gets called into question when it comes to Christian media. Remember Clayton's story from the end of the last video about that movie he was working on, and they had some copyright finagling they had to take care of?
But we first had to go through the managers and everybody else who only saw it as, there's a free and clear song here that everybody in the world has sung 300 times, but my reason for telling my artist to write the song is because we can make, $20 million off of this in a couple of years. It really came down to only about the fact that a big movie studio was going to push it.
Here is the last portion of that story that brings the entire picture together.
The amount of level of having to go to the gatekeepers, but every one of the churches, the pastors wanted their say, and they wanted their fingerprint on the movie, the music. They had all of these things in order to be able to tell their congregations, yes, you should go see this movie. They wanted, the all of the other things of influence, and it comes down to influence. It's all about how we elevated them. How can we elevate individuals or their church of, 100,000 people, of really making them even more of a gatekeeper for the next go around.
After all of this information, here is how I summed it up to Clayton.
Based upon what you're saying to me, it seems like the contemporary Christian music scene has a puritanical problem, to where they feel the need to be this grand example to everyone else of what quote-unquote Jesus is calling you to, which is an unrealistic expectation of perfection. And if you show publicly or even privately that you don't embody basically Jesus 2.0, then you are gate-kept out of the entire industry. And the thing that really keeps people from doing that is less about the shame and more about losing the money.
Yes.
I want to break free. I want to break free. I want to break free from your lies. You're so self-satisfied. I don't need you. I want to break free. God knows I want to break free.
When your options are stay silent or lose your income, that's a really difficult decision to make.
but some artists are brave enough to take the leap and get out.
That's kind of the problem. And, my friend Switchfoot, we'd share stages. And finally, after a few years of it, they said, forget this. We want to be honest. We want to talk about the ups and the downs. Yes, they tend to approach life much like the U2s of the world that is a little more euphoric and very positive bent. But they finally just got sick of playing the game of the walking that line of having to talk about their faith. But they chose, when they moved out, that their faith didn't change. They just chose, in the mainstream world, we're just not going to talk about our faith. And ultimately, I think that's the best way to go. There's some out there who are absolutely great, but they get overshadowed because everybody wants to talk about what they think and what their beliefs rather than the art. So there's been a mass exodus from the early 2000s away. Anybody who has a faith doesn't want to have anything to do with CCM anymore, because it's so artistically stifling. And it's not about your theory and your composition, it's really about what you have to say. And that's my biggest problem. And thank goodness, I think it's been the best thing that's happened to music is I hate to say it, but the demise of CCM, with the exception of the worship music movement of the last 20 years, it's been the best thing that's happened to music.
There are a ton of artists now who are Christian that do talk about their beliefs in their music, who are not a part of CCM and that entire culture that comes with it. Like Clayton mentioned, Coldplay and U2 are excellent examples of this, although not overtly Christian. For prog fans like myself, how about Terra Maze? Terra Maze is an Australian progressive metal band that my fans turned me on to about a year or so ago. Until I saw a comment on one of my videos from about a month ago, I had no idea that they were even Christian affiliated. Just to confirm, I reached out to them and asked them if they were indeed a Christian band, and here is what Dean replied. "Hey mate, we don't classify ourselves as anything other than just a band playing music, but I have a faith and it's always been in our music. Cheers, Dean." It's really that simple. They make badass music, which, by the way, I highly recommend checking out Terra Maze for yourself. Fantastic stuff. And if you really want to look further into the semantic meaning of any of it, you can undertake that on your own, but it's not the most valuable portion of the music. The most valuable portion is the music. They're spreading the good word, and they're an amazing example of not taking your craft for granted and creating something truly special. I can't think of a better way of telling God thank you for the gifts that he's given you. Or for example, how about my band, Crusade? No, we do not have overtly Christian themes. No, we do not affiliate ourselves with Christianity directly, or really even indirectly. But we are all raised with the Christian ethos, and it permeates our music and our message. Our song Standing Before the Fall, for example, it's a song about a person who is actually about to commit suicide and does the act of jumping off of a bridge into water and is drowning, and partway through tries to save themselves because they realize the meaning of life is not about them, it's about serving others. While it's not a directly Christian song talking about Jesus, 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 it certainly heavily draws off of the Christian ethos. So we can see a path forward for Christian artists who do want to stay authentic and do want to maintain the integrity of their artistry. Either leave CCM or just never get into it. But what about for the artists that are in CCM right now? Is there any solution for the industry?
As a whole, this is going to be a somewhat sensationalistic statement. I believe that the entire industry needs to be dismantled and essentially go away. There's no reason for it. Write what is on your heart, and if it happens to be uplifting, a message that includes your beliefs, awesome. But why does there need to be a subgenre about it? It's self-serving.
Even I was taken aback when I heard Clayton say this. It was not my first thought to just culturally abolish CCM and do away with it. Obviously, there's a place in society for Christian music, just like there's a place in society for all other forms of music. So I pushed back. Say there's an artist
who declares himself a Christian and just like makes music about Jesus and his faith and all that stuff all the time, and say that there isn't this CCM label that exists. You think that's okay?
You just described Sufjan Stevens.
Wait, how do you pronounce his name?
Sufjan Stevens?
I didn't know how to fucking pronounce his name, but yeah, he's actually incredible.
Yeah.
He's really good.
For those who don't know, Sufjan Stevens is another badass artist who my fans introduced me to years ago. And again, I had no idea he was a Christian, and I had no idea the music he made was Christian in nature. I mean, another example of a badass artist you need to check out.
It's really interesting. He's not defined by that because it's not it's not a genre that you're so stuck with. So again, be weird, be whatever it is that is on your, like, that you're created to be authentic, but be authentic to your beliefs and like, I think the moral compass, like, if you have we as artists, we need to find our moral compass more than trying to find the fame and find the business model. But the more like grounded that we are, the art comes out of that rather than being, a product of it.
I completely agree with Clayton, and that has been my ethos for years. Let your life and growth inform your art. That is real inspiration, that is authentic inspiration, and people can see and hear the authenticity. Even if they don't love it, they'll know you're real, which means at very least they will respect you. And for those who do love it, you'll be helping them out a lot more than manipulating a scientifically satisfying product. So I tried to sum up Clayton's point here about effectively socially abolishing CCM because I really wasn't sure where I still sat on it myself. He made some pretty compelling arguments.
You think that by having this label of Christian music as a genre, it perpetuates this cycle or even prompts this apparatus for these pastors to say, this is okay to listen to. We know this is okay to listen to, and keeps these artists in this quote unquote safe realm that they can't experiment out of and can't be real with. And that goes both artistically and with their actual personal lives. And by removing that label and thereby completely subverting the industry, you can provide people the ability to
like ultimately make your own decisions. At the end of the day, I argue that evangelical Christianity is not the intent of Christianity. I think that American Christianity is not the Christianity that was written in the Bible. We become used car salesmen when we try to have to like convince everybody else that we are right. But like, I think there's a beauty when, like, if you have a belief that you don't have to sell somebody else on it, then you're actually allowing Yahweh to work in people, like, independently of having to convince them of something.
It's next to impossible to do a truly critical look at CCM and not include evangelical Christianity. CCM was born from and has always coincided with it. The evangelical movement makes conversion a central point of its purpose. When you're constantly out there trying to tell people how wonderful Jesus is without showing them how wonderful Jesus is, it can start to come across as disingenuous or even just wrong, at very least questionable. While praise and worship seems to be aimed primarily towards people who are already a member of the faithful, the other side of CCM, a large portion of it, attempts to mimic current contemporary sounds as a way of acting as proselytizing the word of God through a secular guise.
And that just seems really inauthentic. It almost comes across as if the religion has nothing of value of its own, or at least it doesn't see anything of value of its own, so it has to take on the mantle of the secular world because it doesn't stand up to it. When you don't have enough courage to be yourself and you have to pretend to be someone else in order to be likable, yeah, that comes across as a scummy used car salesman. Regardless of what the artist's intentions are, at a basic level, that's how it's perceived. Are you really going to be gathering more people around your religion by doing that? And if you are, what kind of people are you gathering into your religion? What are you sacrificing by trying to make yourself appear more secular and almost shunning your ancient roots, your sacred roots? What are you sacrificing?
Honesty. I think you're sacrificing the divine in the process.
Yeah, I mean, like, maybe not always, but you at least have to ask yourself that question, in my opinion, before you go ahead and start making changes to things that you might not even have a full conception of why they were there in the first place.
The substance of things that are out there is just really sorely lacking in a lot of ways. You'll have your 1 in 10 that is actually really good and maybe moving. It seems like it's more about the bells and the whistles and the song and dance than it is about the creator that it's supposed to be sung for.
I just can't get into it. I just keep thinking all these people are up here singing and they're getting off stage and doing the exact same scummy crap that anyone does in any industry. There's no difference. I have a hard time believing these people are just trying to spread the good word and tell people about their faith. It has caused some mild arguments between me and other people of faith. They're like, how can you not feel this passion? I have tons of passion for the Lord. I have no passion for these people playing music. I'll still listen to some music from artists who happen to be Christian, but don't make all overtly Christian music. I honestly wouldn't feel any major way about it if it wasn't for the fact that it's connected to Christianity. That's what makes it so much worse to me.
I think it's far too simple. And I think that life has to be about simplicity. I think how we approach life, there's elements of life that are both simple and complex, but it's not about black and whites. And I think that any time with faith, if you put faith into commercialism, you're dictating both morality and giving definitives that tend to be more on black and whites rather than the grays and the nuances of society and humanism and just the messinesses of what we all struggle with. I think there are far less black and whites than there are grays, and to far too many in this genre, it's about black and white. And I think that it misses such a nuance of life and complexity that alienates so many people, and it alienates people that feel, oh, I'm not good enough.
And if I also can add to that, it shields them from the realities of the pain of existence.
Yes. You just said it right there. I don't think that religion, I don't think it's meant to make us feel better. I think it's meant to elevate us.
I think people confuse feeling good, in quotes, or feeling happy or joyful with feeling fulfilled. I think they confuse those things a lot. And I think that's actually been pushed onto us because of commercialism.
Yes. And commercialism is so confused. Commercialism is not Christianity. There's nothing, it does not fit. It does not work in any sort of way. But the commercialism of America and the Christianity that the media has put out there it elicits a very cheap emotion of I am good, you are bad. I get to pat myself on the back because I get to go to heaven and you are wrong, and I have to convince you. And then if I convince you, I get to pat myself on the back even more. So, cool, I get this, but it's really...
It gives you that dopamine hit of the satisfaction of doing something quote-unquote right, and also the emotional manipulation of the words coming from the pulpit and the music coming from the speakers. And then on top of that, solidifies itself in by giving you meaning by having an enemy to fight, which is everything that doesn't believe what you believe.
Yes, but the divine is meant to be like I don't, if anybody tries to define the divine, I question that. But like the moment of, if there's a divine moment that you experience, that is something special, and who is anybody else to try to like copy that, you know, or try to like, the minute you try to copy that moment and replicate that to somebody else, it's selfish. It's inherently selfish. But I think we need a far greater respect for the divine and a far less respect for what we individually have to say on that, with what our individual opinions are. Religion, but CCM especially, and Christian media, is about giving an answer to a question that has not been asked.
And to be fair, it's usually a really shitty answer too.
Yeah, like
it's not a great answer.
But until somebody has asked you a question, can you actually give them an answer? Like, it comes down to relationship, and it comes down to respect. But until like somebody has genuinely asked, Mike, what do you think about this? You can't, like, you can give a thought, but they won't really listen to it until there's a relationship that's built. And that's the heart of my belief, that we can't, like, you have to have a respect for people rather than preach at them or tell them that they're wrong. We talk about the 7 deadly sins, but it's like actually the opposite of those are actually the actual intriguing ones. And that is what, you know, I just don't think that we need to be selling morality. I think that is I think with this holy respect for the divine in a context of how we live our lives with respect and kindness and humility, that says far more than me preaching something.
There is good music out there, obviously, to be listened to, even in the Christian realm. Those that are authentically following want to give him the best offering. Those people are out there. That music is out there, and I'd encourage you to look, although it'll take some looking. That's a kind of a wordy way of saying, yeah, keep looking. There's hope out there. You'll find it if you look hard enough.
Anything you want to leave my audience with?
No.